Okay, can you hear me okay? Thanks, Boris, for inviting me. Thanks, Ted, Eric, Patrick, Chad, Eli, Peter, and everyone else behind the scenes who put this event together. And thanks to all of you for taking time out of your lives to be here and to do the work that you do. I also want to extend a deeply felt personal thank you and congratulations to Jay and the entire Blue Sky team for the years of work that they put in to make all of this happen. It's not a small amount of work, and being here at the first conference of this sort is a pretty big achievement. So hi, I feel really honored to be here, in no small part because of what this gathering represents. I've been at this a long time, as Boris was saying, and I don't think I can properly express how much it means to me personally to see so many amazing people who are working on building meaningful alternatives to online social tools together in one room, and many more watching online, hopefully. Normally, when I give talks about decentralization, and I suspect most here can empathize with this, it's to a group of mostly confused people who think I'm from a different planet. Being here with you is like hardcore therapy for my Cassandra complex. But it also has the side effect of triggering my imposter syndrome. It's entirely probable that nothing I'm going to say is going to blow your mind, TED style, but I hope it can set the stage for us all to listen and share with the incredible folks who are here over the next couple of days. I want to share a little bit of my context here, because the story of Blue Sky and AtProto starts right at the beginning of Twitter, and I hope that context can help inform some of the work that you're all doing. So starting at the beginning, I helped conceive Twitter. I didn't give birth to it, that was Jack and Florian, but I was its midwife and adoptive mother. For 2 months in early 2007, I was the only programmer on Twitter. I was the code sole guardian and caretaker. My semi-official job title was given to me by a visitor to the office, who will remain nameless, who, upon being introduced to me, exclaimed, "Oh, you're the Twitter fluffer." But I also coined the word tweet, designed @replies, and created OAuth around the same time. Which is to say, I know more than the average bear about how you're all feeling right now. I was also the first person to hate Twitter. A badge I wear with honor. Back when it was SMS only, before it publicly launched, I did the math and realized that on my immigrant prepaid phone plan, it would cost me about $2,000 a year to send and receive even a 2006 era number of tweets. I didn't think it was going anywhere. But eventually I came to love Twitter, and it's lived rent-free in my head ever since. In so many ways, it defines me as much as I want it not to. It's a relationship that's unreciprocated. I was a working-class kid, naive about media and venture capital world, and I didn't become especially rich or famous. I think not many people have heard my name, which is awesome. The job, as they say, will never love you back. I wish I could just let it go, but Twitter, the concept, not the collection of servers and contracts and code, especially now that it's called X, is so much bigger than a job. Even if it was often silly, it was the most visceral representation of public human communication and ideas that anyone has ever created. How do you let that go? No, seriously, if you have ideas, please let me know. Everyone in millennial proximal generations can point to pivotal moments in their lives or the world that hinged on social media. And I know many of you here have personal stories that have defined social media itself. For me, there are a few defining moments from the early days that really stand out. The first was a thing called TextMob that I briefly helped with in 2004, and that helped inform Twitter a few years later when we were working on the idea. It was a way for protesters to coordinate efforts during protests in the 2004 Republican National Convention. Basically, it was a really primitive group SMS system, and until it was blocked by carriers, it worked a charm. Years later, when the Arab Spring happened on Twitter, my reaction wasn't one of surprise, it was, hurrah, it worked. There's an incredibly boring part of Twitter that was the Google PM-designed venture capital-backed Web 2.0 startup, but there's always been an interesting punk thread in it too, something that Facebook or Instagram never had. In the early days, before anyone understood that it could be used for anything but sharing bathroom status, it was easy to see, if hard to believe, that both the possibilities and the problems with the platform we were building. It was clear to me, at least, that moderation was going to be a huge problem. My initial design for @replies was a decidedly less viral version, where only people who you followed could send you replies. Twitter's really amazing product person at the time really wanted to make them open to maximize virality. I protested that our team of 3 developers at the time didn't have the resources to build moderation tools to deal with the inevitable spam and harassment, but conceded that the virality was probably going to win the argument. I'd build open @replies if he took personal responsibility for the outcome. He did not. I think I lost that bet. The third thing that really defines that era for me was in early 2008 at a conference not unlike this one. A lovely guy named Ralph Meyer and I got federation between Twitter and a similar long-defunct service called Jaiku that apparently 3 people used, working over XMPP. My motivation was very strongly born out of the knowledge that we couldn't solve all of these problems ourselves, no matter how successful we were. I did win that bet. Despite support from our earliest investor, it never launched publicly, aborted by a later round of venture capital. But even back then, it was so obviously the destiny of online social networks. The experience of seeing federation work back then across 2 totally different systems, I've known in my bones for almost decades now that a more free social system was both possible and inevitable, and it was a revelation that's really stuck with me. I lost a lot of bets back then. I was pushed out of the company for trying to make the Fediverse a thing, and for a few years after I got pushed out, I tried to make the Fediverse a thing without Twitter, and that didn't work. For a long time, I thought that it was my fault, personally, that we failed to have a better alternative. The enormity of Twitter became oppressive to me because despite its immense merits, it was so obviously the wrong thing, corrupted from its potential by capital and a lack of imagination. In retrospect, of course, and what was a simple tweak to the Twitter code that could have changed the course of the platform and the world, turns out that such a massive project turns out to be such a massive project that very few people around the world have even the faintest glimpse of the work that lies ahead. So, seeing you all here is deeply gratifying and hopeful for me. As dark as these days are, and as awful as Twitter/X has become, seeing blue sky and all the amazing work that you're doing feels like Seattle at the moment, just as the cherry blossoms are starting to pop open after a long, desolate, and gray winter. So, the question now is, what's this future that we're heading towards? Obviously, that's a big question with few answers, but I'd like to talk for a bit about one particular aspect. For me, one major part of Twitter was always unfinished, specifically, all the things it never was. At its heart, I always saw Twitter from the inside, as this malleable thing, a big network of messages, content from people that could be shared and reshared and remixed, and things that could evolve. The specific 140-character shape of tweets was always important for Twitter to be Twitter, but there's more than life to tweet. There's more to life than tweets. I need more coffee. Skeets. Even drill tweets. Scandalo, I know. And really, this is true of all the big social networks, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. They're all just stuck in their groove. They're just boring. When we think about the broad spectrum of human communication, of art and science and commerce and politics and really everything social, today's online networks are not great at communicating nuance, let alone in a healthy way, to say the least. 60 years ago, as the world tried to come to terms with not just publishing books, but with the creation of radio, television, and new forms of recording many aspects of the human experience, we got this concept of mediums as technology. As John Culkin wrote, summarizing Marshall McLuhan, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. Jumping ahead 30 to 40 years, the emergence of the internet was incredible in a very specific way that I don't think we talk about or think about very much. The internet, as a medium, is a medium for creating new mediums. Or, at least it was. I see the Web 2.0 moment, sort of the 2005, 2008 era, as this moment where the internet tooling was good enough for people to build cool stuff, but while the web was still malleable in all the ways we like to imagine it is. That was before the monopolists took hold and the platforms that we built ossified into the pile of enshittified garbage that they are today. I want to share one of my favorite clips of all time from a film called The Burden of Dreams, where the director, Werner Herzog, is reflecting on the struggles of filming Fitzcarraldo in the Peruvian jungle. And I'm realizing I don't actually have audio. Oh, yeah. Oh, is it an HDMI? Let's see if you can hear it. Oh, no, that's not going to work. Let's see here. Sorry. Oh, we can use this one.
Let's skip that one.
Okay. Let's see. High tech.
Taking a close look at what's around us, there is some sort of a harmony. It is the harmony of overwhelming and collective murder. And we, in comparison to the articulate vileness and baseness and obscenity of all this jungle, we, in comparison to that enormous articulation, we only sound and look like badly pronounced and half-finished sentences out of a stupid suburban novel, a cheap novel. And we have to become humble in front of this overwhelming misery and overwhelming fornication, overwhelming growth, and overwhelming lack of order. Even the stars up here in the sky look like a mess. There is no harmony in the universe. We have to get acquainted to this idea that there is no real harmony as we have conceived it. But when I say this all full of admiration for the jungle. It is not that I hate it. I love it. I love it very much. But I love it against my better judgment.
Oh, I love that man. So there's this incredible tension between this incredibly rational German dude trying to find order in the universe and the utter chaos and creativity of the natural world. He wants the creativity, but he, like us, is trying to cling to things that are understandable. Blue Sky is like that. It's a simulacrum of Twitter designed explicitly to be approachable and understandable. It's an amazing achievement, but the jungle is more interesting. AppProto could, if we let it, be the jungle. The flexibility of schemas and, critically, the culture of openness around the schemas, I hope, can be this fertile ground for new experimentation. I think we're already seeing a bunch of this, not just bringing existing mediums to AppProto like flashes, events on Smoke Signal, or deeply necessary rich portable moderation tools and communities as mediums like Black Sky. But the weird stuff like Flushing.im, Roomy.chat, Tangled, and so many more. I want to see Ravelry, a 20-year-old social network for knitters on AppProto, where the social objects, the stuff in the lexicon, are knitting patterns and skeins of yarns, along with complex location-based stuff like Strava activities and restaurant reviews, and normal stuff like long-form blog posts, but also weirdly specific experiments that aren't just markdown-based blogs or email newsletters, but more like zines, like actual weird punk zines playing with complex layouts and highly bespoke interfaces, not just in static HTML, but with rich social aspects, maybe with embedded podcasts. And what does long-form, short-form video look like, freed from the shackles of an endlessly scrolling, attention-based algorithm? And letterbox-styled movie curations where film nerds can go deep, extending the metadata, not to mention what news syndication could look like if journalists actually had control over the shape of their messages. Or recipes. Oh, for the love of recipes, with rich metadata and no life story riddled with ads. and you know, just everything. There's a catch, though. This proliferation of mediums, it's too much. The jungle is tolerable from the perspective of any given creature within the jungle, but viewed from Herzog's perspective, as someone on the outside looking in, it's just overwhelming chaos. And if we're lucky, it's going to get even more chaotic. In many ways, we're already past the tolerable complexity threshold with the internet, and it's absolutely arguable that the monopolies we see today have emerged as an answer to complexity. A little bit of corporate fascism to keep the world understandable. We can have 280 characters as a treat. And even with the monopolies, though, it's too much. How many messaging apps do you have on your phone? For me, it's n-1 too many. I think this is one area that Mastodon in particular really messed up. Having a one-to-one connection between the servers you use and your identity makes all of this so much worse. There's nothing in the Fediverse protocols that demands that one identity maps to one server or medium, and indeed the whole point of WebFinger when we created it was to decouple identity from specific applications. The original goal of WebFinger was to allow someone to have a single handle, originally just their email address, that they could use to link to their various social accounts, premised on the idea that bootstrapping the network is the hardest problem that new social networks face. Instead, the Fediverse under the Mastodon model just ended up adding more complexity. AppProto, in contrast to Mastodon, gets this exactly right. By tying data to identity, rather than identity to any one of many different services, the apparent complexity to people using the system is vastly reduced. It also means that, borrowing from sociologist Irving Goffman's dramaturgical conception of human interaction, where we play theatrical roles for each of the different aspects of our lives, we can bring all of the relevant parts of our whole selves to each interaction without thinking about the technological infrastructure that underpins it. So, for example, just as I can have an AppProto identity that's mostly jokes with friends, photos of my cats, invites to birthday parties, and GPS traces of my ski holiday, I can have a different professional AppProto account that's full of important long-form thought pieces about the future of work, photos of my cats, job postings, and intercompany AppProto chat rooms. I can also have a completely separate account for union organizing and other political work, replete with end-to-end encryption and news feeds full of stuff that the mainstream media like Fox News or Instagram would never report on or surface. In these scenarios, my identity is fragmented, but in ways that are controlled by me, and in support of the separation between the different aspects of my life, rather than per artificial constructs like which server I signed up to. I'll also conjecture that it makes all sorts of the big problems that we face in building online social networks, things like trust and safety, much easier to deal with, because just like in the real world, a persistent conception of identity means that we can transfer trust from one aspect of our life to another. I also believe, quite strongly, that there's nothing preventing the Fediverse from changing tack and getting this right, nor any other technological barriers preventing nor any other technological barriers preventing ActivityPub and AppProto, or just about any other socio-technological system, from working together. In fact, I think it's critical that they do. Ultimately, and as I think we'll hear from several folks this weekend, as good as it is to build good technology, it's the social outcomes that matter. I'll say that again because it's really important. Specific technologies only matter in as much as they do the job that we want them to do. It's ultimately that perspective, that people matter over any specific technology, that drove me to work with Ralph to build a federated Twitter and to try and push back against the impulse to build the most viral thing that we could, or to work on TextMob before that Indie Media, whose rallying cry coming out of the anti-globalization protests here in Seattle in 1999 was "be the media," because that was a hard thing to be back then, in defiance of corporate mainstream media that suppressed authentic voices and stories of the oppressed and marginalized. Ursula Franklin, a brilliant writer and activist on the role of technology in society, asked this question in her Massey lectures that she delivered in 1990. How come the right to change our mental environment, to change the constructs of our minds and the sounds around us, seems to have been given away without anybody's consent? It feels more relevant than ever today. So, and despite the gray in my beard, none of the history I've talked about was very long ago. I'd like to think that there's still time to course correct so that this period of time becomes a memory akin to the early days of the telegraph and the telephone, which I think warrants a brief detour to discuss. So The telegraph. How many people know the history of the telegraph? It's pretty good show of hands. But like maybe 10%. It was invented in the early 1800s, and it was a method for sending short text messages. The first telegraphs had 27 wires, one wire plus, per letter, plus a neutral. This is the Cook and Wheatstone telegraph from 1836. It had 6 wires and 5 needles and could send 25 different symbols by triangulating 2 of the needles at a time, leveraging the newly discovered phenomenon of electromagnetism. Almost a decade later, Morse's famous code went into production. The first message was, "What hath God wrought?" Not making that up. And they were able to reduce the number of wires to 2. Technological progress. 30 years after that, in 1870, we finally get the Baudot code, a 5-bit binary encoding for text, 6 years before the telephone was invented. So, after the invention of the telephone, we get this funny period where we transition from the telegraph, something that people used by going down to the railway office to send messages, since the lines were mostly all run by the railways. The original purpose of telegraphs to manage train signaling, to the phone, which was something that regular people would use in their homes. You could get hooked up to the system, and you didn't need complicated equipment to use it. You dialed by picking up the phone and talking to an operator who would patch the wire for your phone into the appropriate wire for the person that you were calling. Except here's the catch. You could only call people who were on the same switchboard as you, as in they paid the same company as you to operate their phone line. This state of affairs lasted until 1914, when, surprise, surprise, under antitrust pressure, AT&T made the Kingsbury Commitment, which cemented AT&T as a natural monopoly, but did allow pretty much everyone with a telephone in the US to call anyone else, regardless of their local operator. It took 100 years to go from the invention of the telegraph to something that started to resemble the phone system that I grew up with. And that entire time, the interconnecting wires were run by local monopolies. Phone number portability, that is the legal right to own your telephonic identity, didn't come until almost another 100 years after that. And, side note, it was implemented with FTPing routing files around in CSV format. I'm not joking. We haven't even begun to have a conversation about what that legal right would look like with email addresses, despite their absolutely critical role in most of our lives, let alone what legislation around PLC identifiers might look like. In this post-X period of fragmentation and migration, we've lost something genuinely important. Twitter was a critical tool that helped so many communicate, organize, and create. I'm hopeful that Blue Sky can help guide us past the fall of our Babel, and that can show up in a way that, for example, allows my fellow Canadians to run our own infrastructure, just as we have our own laws. As important as Twitter was, though, there was so much we never had. The road ahead is long. There are so many things that I haven't even alluded to in this brief talk that are necessary to do and to build before the atmosphere becomes something that we can actually breathe. As you do this work, try to remember that Rome wasn't built in a day, and that the goal must not be just a world without Caesars or Zucks, but one that holds true to Ursula Franklin's aspirations, a world where, as individuals and as communities, we have the agency to shape the tools we use, and with them, our minds. I'll end on another quote from Ursula Franklin. The viability of technology, like democracy, depends in the end on the practice of justice and on the enforcement of limits to power. Thanks again for being here today, and thanks again for doing the work that you're doing.
Wow. Questions? Form a line up here if you'd like to ask questions. No questions? more of a comment, really. So Blaine, how long is this going to take us?
I hope I get to see it. Yeah.
Come on down.
Thank you for a great talk. And also, I hate you because now I have to rewrite my talk, and I don't have very much time. The last time I think we interacted in person was at DTN in Berlin, and I'll talk about that in my talk later, so please come to my talk, everyone. I have a question for you, though. At the time that you were thinking about all these wonderful things that could be done, modern LLM AI techniques were not available.
Yeah.
And so much of what underlies the power in this is the context setting, context collapse, and context transmission. That's the power of a medium. We now have, assuming we properly punkify and hack the LLMs and bend them to our needs, we have the possibility of using LLM technology to vastly facilitate in a way that we never conceived before. Now, that's my point of view. Do you agree or disagree with that? Do you have perspectives on how we might be able to accelerate this process with these technologies?
It's a good question. I don't know if we, I don't know if we know the answer to that yet. I think the question is, can we control it? One of the things that didn't make it into the talk is this idea that a friend at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge talks about is, and I think Charlie Strauss has referred to it as slow AI, and it's this idea that corporations are a form of AI. They're a form of like an agency that we don't necessarily control. So the example would be if you're the CEO of Coca-Cola and you make an executive decision to end the production of Coca-Cola, the organization will actually resist that. There are things that we can't change in the world that we have created. And I guess that's the crux of the question for me with AI is like, can we maintain this sort of control that Franklin's talking about with that AI? And I don't know. I'm hopeful, I guess, but also very wary.
Hi. In the section of the talk where you were talking about how WebFinger was designed to solve the bootstrapping problem, you also mentioned that Mastodon basically did it wrong. They added complexity to the Fediverse. Can you expand on that a little bit and explain what happened there?
Sure, yeah. It's actually really simple. They basically, you can't have links to multiple profiles in a Mastodon WebFinger address. So if they added that, then you could have one profile that you use across the Fediverse, but instead you end up having a whole bunch of profiles, and so it becomes this fragmented thing. It's a very small change, but one with big impacts.
I don't have a really specific question, but I'd love you to unpack a bit more the points you were making about @protocol and ActivityPub and working together, and how you were sort of talking about how they differentiate and strengths and weaknesses. Yeah,
I think, I guess my biggest concern is that if we end up with this fragmented world where, you know, we over-index on technology rather than the tools that we use together as people, as humans, the technology matters, but it doesn't matter more than the people. And so, you know, I think there are plenty of examples in history where, I mean, I loved the fact that I used this microphone to play the audio because we're really good at figuring stuff out. And so this idea that these systems are incompatible, I think to me is just false. And we just need to do the work. And it is work, and it'll take work to figure out how to make them work together. And we'll all end up better off if, you know, we don't need to, as humans, negotiate which technology we're going to use before we communicate.
So I have more of a question around the structure of social media and how it interacts for and against the kind of connectivity with what is a true social network of people to people. And I'm wondering your thoughts of how we interact socially online looks so different than how we interact in person when we're in local communities, and how we can go about taking the best of both worlds. It just seems like we've left that local behind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Excuse me. Yeah, that's a really good point that, you know, I think the reason that that's the case is with the monopolies, there's, from Zuckerberg's perspective, there's a disincentive to allow that sort of genuine local communication to happen. Whether it's just like not wanting to put in the work to make it work, or actively resisting people having agency. My hope is that as we get these systems that give people more agency to sort of structure the conversation and structure the networks, but also lower the barrier to having smaller networks, that we'll see the emergence of smaller networks that you know, aren't bound by the Facebook group moderator tool set, that people can actually evolve better tools to use in those sorts of small community scenarios. So yeah, I mean, hopefully we can communicate more authentically. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us today. Have you developed a list of things that you would like to see happen in the protocol itself, or things that you'd like to see us here in the audience build to help advance these concepts? What are your top priorities?
Oh, that's a good question. The short answer is no, there's no list, but the long answer is there's a very long list. Yeah, no, I think, you know, I think the moderation tools are huge, giving people agency, and like the relay stuff is really big. That's a big question, and I think figuring that out is huge. Those are for this community, probably the biggest things. I'm a big fan of the lexicon stuff. I think I'm excited to see where that goes, where people take it.
Thank you for your talk. It was very moving.
Thank you.
I worry about interruptions to our access to the physical infrastructure that we need for everything that we're talking about. You know, we're talking about building alternative social networking formations, but they all rely on all of our computers working and, you know, being updated. So I'm just curious about your kind of thoughts about that, and how, I'll just stop there. I'm curious about extending your thoughts into that question.
Well, I'm Canadian, so that's a that's a big thought right now. Yeah, no, the dependency chain is scary for sure. There are so many problems. I don't know that I have
I have a science fiction book recommendation, and we've already been handing some out. Werner Vinge's Rainbow's End. Who's read that? A few handful of people in it. Written in 2006. It's a future world of ubiquitous computing, and every device has a secure enclave. And the world government, so apparently we get a world government in the future, which is awesome, but it has backdoors to all of the secure enclaves, so that's awkward. But a few hacker types have access to hardware, Hecho in Paraguay, which has the secure enclave without the backdoor. And Tessa has hinted, Blaine has hinted, these are things that we also need to talk about, and is something that this community should continue to think about as well. It is part of the extended work, but it's a lot, right? In Canada, I can't send a packet from Vancouver to Toronto, never mind the Atlantic provinces, without routing through US networks. I think we'll just all sit with these thoughts.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would add is that there's some pretty interesting experiments in the community right now with things like Raspberry Pis and whatnot. Another thing that didn't make it into the talk, the Raspberry Pi that is currently being set up to run all of Blue Sky that we might hear about later, has the same computing power. This Raspberry Pi 5 with an NVMe has the same computing power as our entire infrastructure did at Twitter when we had like 5 million users. So the fail whale was for reasons, but but I think there's some really interesting things happening in terms of what we can do with very inexpensive technology nowadays, and that's quite exciting. So.
I encourage everyone to say hi to Tessa from Germ Network. Will be joining us in the privacy talk. I'd encourage everyone to onboard into the absolutely amazing iOS-only onboarding with Germ Network using an Apple app clip. So you can do secure messaging by kind of just bumping phones, and let's all experiment with that, right? So let's leave it there. We'll have a 25-minute break, so we're back here to start with Paul Frazee at 10:45, coffee and snacks. Giant round of applause for Blaine.